Hi everyone, I am Mike Motter with BakerTilly's dealership practice. It's hard to believe that June is almost over. 2022 seems to really be flying by. Up to Speed features informational content to keep you up to date on changes in tax law, accounting regulations, and other topics that affect your dealership and its operations. Today's topic centers around dealership enterprise risk management, and I am happy to have Tom Kline from Vantage here with me today to talk about some of the key issues in today's dealership environment that you need to be aware of when it comes to risk mitigation. Tom is a third-generation auto dealer with more than 30 years of experience in the franchise dealership world. His family started their dealership business in 1925 and was the largest retail and fleet GM import dealership in Virginia for more than 25 years. Tom sold his last dealership in 2019 and is now a risk mitigation consultant that helps dealerships uncover and solve problems they may not even know they have. Welcome, Tom.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks for having me. It's great to
All
be
right.
here.
It's great to have you. So, Tom, please tell me a little bit about enterprise risk mitigation for dealers. What is it? How does it work?
Okay, so risk mitigation at a dealership means that we try to stop problems from happening before they become big. If you can manage the problems when they're small and keep them small, then we ensure that no one is going and taking money out of the dealer's pocket. And my job is to make sure that we keep them small and resolve them quickly, because I like to say that problems are usually like rotten fish, and the longer that they go on, the worse they smell.
I can understand that. So, where do you see the greatest amount of exposure at a dealership? From my experience or from what I experienced, the exposure is just about in every single department in the dealership. So, when you start this process, where do you even begin?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I try to begin where the dealer has the biggest exposure, either personally or professionally. And there's some laws that the dealer has personal exposure. For example, the IRS 8300 cash reporting law, penalties for that are up to, I believe, $5 million and up to 5 years of jail time for willful noncompliance. So that's one place we start. Another place we'd start, for example, is in the biggest area of exposure that I see when I go into dealers is their umbrella coverage. So what I do is I sit down and do a quick math calculation with the dealer, which is I say, okay, I want you to take your land and your building, add those two numbers together, then add your parts inventory, because that's usually owned in cash, then the used vehicle inventory that's not floored, and then to those numbers add the blue sky. For a single point dealership, you're going to get, unless it's a smaller store, you're going to get in the 15 to 20 million or 15 to 25 million dollar range, because that's what it's worth, and blue sky values right now are so high. So then I asked the dealer to go look at their umbrella coverage. Last time I did this in New York, which was last week, I asked the dealer how much umbrella coverage he had, and he had $3 million of umbrella coverage. So I explained that with $3 million of umbrella coverage, but assets of 15 to 20 million, if the parts driver has a catastrophic accident or someone gets hurt or any of a number of what ifs, which is what a risk mitigation guy says, right? What if this happens? What if that happens? So if any of those what ifs happen, then the dealer puts his entire enterprise at risk, because if there's a catastrophic problem, in the case of the New York dealer I was with, $3 million isn't going to cover it. And so at that point, they're going to be negotiating over whether that dealer turns his business over to the lawyer or sues it, or how they're going to resolve the problem. So take the biggest exposures first and go from there.
And I'm going to guess most dealerships are underinsured based on what they're looking to get out of if some situation were to occur. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. No question about almost everyone that I walk into.
And you don't sell insurance, correct?
I do not sell
All right.
insurance. No.
So you're
So
not biased towards selling an insurance policy.
that's right. That's right. I'm there to protect the dealer. Remember, I was a dealer, right? I was a dealership owner for 30 years. So I've sat in the seat and I understand where the discomforts come from. And if somebody hits a school bus that has children on it, you can imagine what kind of liability that they would have and what it would take to try to resolve something like that. And 3 million or 5 million or even 7 million is just not going to cut it.
Yeah, that's a scary thought. So how do problems typically start at the dealership?
Usually, it's one of three different ways. Most dealership problems, I'm going to say 70% of dealership problems start on two legs. They're either customer problems or they're employee problems. You get employees who go to the EEOC or they go to a lawyer because they don't like how they're being treated. And customer problems can start a myriad of ways. The biggest exposure for customer problems, actually, the way you find out about them is to review what's on the internet and Google and Facebook and Dealer Rater and Yelp and all of those kinds of things, making sure that if you do have a customer who posts and they have a problem, that you have a process at the dealership to get that customer back into the store and fix the problem.
Okay. So, many dealerships carry insurance policies, and obviously we just talked that they probably don't carry enough. But if they carry enough insurance, isn't that enough? Isn't that all they really need to do to mitigate their risk?
There are so many. I guess I should have finished the rest of your question, which is employees is number one, and I'll come back and answer this question. Employees is number one, and customers. Those are the two-legged problems, and then the third is advertising problems. Some are unintentional, and some are intentional. And making sure you're reviewing your website to make sure that they're in compliance. And I can tell you that 95% of dealership websites are not in compliance. For example, next to the sales price, there should be an asterisk that if you have a disclaimer, if you have a processing fee or that number that you're advertising doesn't include taxes and licenses, those kinds of things. If that's not disclaimed, then according to the Federal Trade Commission and actually an NADA also, they take the position that the taxes and the processing fee are included in that number. And so you have tremendous exposure there. And some exposures at the dealership are not necessarily covered under your insurance policy. For example, Napleton Automotive was recently fined $10 million by the FTC. And one of the allegations was discrimination against a minority. Some garage policies have discrimination coverage. This is called third-party discrimination coverage. Some garage policies have that, and some garage policies don't have that. So if you don't know what's in your insurance policy, then you really don't know the answer of what's covered and what's not. And that's one of the things we talk about as well.
Okay. So what do you actually do? You're going to come into the dealership and review the dealership's operations, their insurance policies, advise them. I mean, kind of do like a risk assessment type on their mitigation strategies.
That's exactly what I do. So from top to bottom, I'll go in and we'll start, as I said, we'll start with the biggest issues first. The umbrella insurance, for example, IRS 8300 I mentioned. A lot of dealers feel like by the way, their 8300 policy is solid, but when I go to look at how things are receipted, they're not being receipted correctly. Cash isn't being receipted as cash. Personal checks aren't being receipted as personal checks. Cashier's checks aren't being receipted as cashier's checks. For example, I see cashier's checks being receipted as personal checks, and that's incorrect, right? Because cashier's checks are considered cash as far as the IRS is concerned. So we do a deep dive into these issues. Adverse action letters is another big one where there's a lot of exposure. Is the dealership sending out an adverse action letter for every time they pull a customer's credit? Huge exposure under the Fair Credit Reporting Act. So I have a checklist of about 45 pages that I've developed over the 30 years that I've been in the business, and I track that. When I'm with the dealer, I track all the things that we do through project management software. Make sure we're tracking each item. A lot of items need follow up. I was just at a dealership this week. 3 months ago, we went through all his websites and made sure that everything was correct and all the asterisks were there and the prices were right and all the disclosures were right and they weren't rebate stacking where somebody can't get a conquest rebate along with a first time buyer's rebate, right? You can't stack rebates like that because nobody can take advantage of it. So we had just finished those a couple months ago, and apparently one of the website providers did a giant reset and it all went away. So so if you're not checking these things, and I said to the dealer, I said, look, I know we just looked at this, but I checked before I came and look, it's messed up again. So we had to go back through it and rewrite some of the disclaimers and add the asterisks and all that kind of thing. So it's risk is a continual process, and dealers need to every dealer has a different risk appetite. Some may say that's not a concern to me, in which case that's fine. I notate it and off we go to the next thing. But it's a continuous process, and we look at each department again based on the overall exposure, and we over time we start narrowing down and making sure that everything's under control from a compliance perspective and a risk perspective.
Okay, and we all know that dealerships are very highly regulated businesses, so there's a lot of risk that's out there. So Tom, I really want to thank you today for your industry knowledge and your expertise in risk mitigation, and for joining us for today's or this month's Up to Speed in our discussion on the risk mitigation as it relates to the auto dealership industry. If you would like more information around risk mitigation, please reach out to a BakerTilly dealership team member or call Tom directly at 757-434-7656 or visit his website at www.bettervantagepoint.com. Thank you for today, and please keep a lookout for our next BakerTilly Up to Speed session.
Thank you, Mike.